record on.
Got it.
Yeah, we've started. So hi, my name's Kat Curriner. I represent Active Watchful Waiting.
I'm Kevin. I'm transsexual. I also am on the board of Active Watchful Waiting.
Okay. And I thought we'd have a bit of a chat because there's major things happening in New South Wales. We've got that Alex Greenwich, who has brought out his equality bill, an omnibus bill, which is split up. If you put it all together, it'd be flicked off the table straight away. So he's broken up conversion therapy, birth, deaths and marriages, self-ID. And then at the same time, we've got Labor pushing for the same things. So that's interesting. And so we do want to talk about a couple of things. One of the things we'll talk about is there was a consultancy paper that was sent out by Labor to a handful of people who are described as survivors of conversion practices and LGBQTIA. Now, of course, I doubt very much that any of the LGB groups would have got a copy. LGB Tasmania, LGB Alliance Australia, COL, LGB Defence, etc. Doubt very much that they would have got a copy. But fortunately, we got hold of a leaked copy. And we had a chance, and I had a chance to look at it, and I've just finished a reply that was 60 pages or something.
65.
Yeah, it was a lot of work. And I do want to have a discussion about a few things that are major concerns about the consultancy paper. So if you don't know what it is that a consultancy paper is, they've drafted up what they think will be the basis of the bill, and then they wanted him to tweak it. That's what I got from that bill. So it looked like, from what I can see, is that everybody knew each other, because one of the things was interesting about the consultancy paper, there was no chairman, there was no name on the consultancy paper, which is kind of unusual, So that suggested to me that everybody knew who everybody was, and they just sent it around to the usual cadre of gender identitarians like Equality Australia, ACON groups, minus 18, all the rest of it, But I had there's a lot of concerns. I have about 4 major concerns. A major concern that I've got, there's no such thing as sex.
On the paper?
No, there's no such thing as sex.
So sex is in no way indicated in the consultancy paper?
No, it's not. It's not at all. It's only gender. And when they talk about something physical, if you don't mind, I actually want to show it to you so that you can see what I'm talking about. Hold on, check on a document like this one. Share screen. Here we go, screen 2. Let me just go into, sorry, I should have brought this up, terminology. Let's see if that comes up. Is that large enough for you to see?
It is indeed.
Good. So when instead of having sex, what they have here is sexual characteristics. Okay.
Wow.
Now, I don't know about you. I want your thoughts on it, but my thoughts on this is that one of the things I've noticed when I've gone through the International Bill of Gender Identity Rights, etc., or I've looked at any of the stuff that's coming out from WHO and the UN everywhere, they're just breaking. There isn't a whole system. A person isn't a whole system. They aren't a complete person. They aren't a complete body, male or female. They have just something that's got attachments like Mr. Potato Head.
It's like Helen Joyce talks about people being meat Lego. It's like that idea has developed along somewhat. Like people are not, male or female, or, they're not male or female. They are a person with, their sexual character. Like, it's like breaking things down. It's very ideological.
Well, the major thing I find, I've got a new favorite person of mine, which is Zach Elliott. He runs a Paradox Institute, and he just talks about sex.
Is he the architect guy that talks about? Is that him? He was an architect student that got into biological stuff.
I don't know. Okay, but that's who he is. Zach Elliott. On his bio, what I'm seeing is biological sex researcher.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Then it's a different guy.
He's got an excellent site called Paradox Institute, and he really does break down sex, what it is, etc. And in short, what people think of sex, they tend to think of that sex is chromosomes, or they think it's X or XY. But really, in short, what it is a whole reproductive system. What you've got is you've got the whole, our human biology separated between male and female is designed that we can reproduce the sexes. And when it makes a choice, you know, you've got on the chromosomes of X, Y, etc., you've got a gene there. If there's a Y chromosome, it's got an SRY gene. And it basically means it's going to go in that direction to make a reproductive system that will be male. And then, or if it's absent, then you've got another gene, WNT4, on the female one. It's going to become female, you know. And it's a whole, what people don't understand, it's a whole system. Just like you can't take a car engine and put it on a push bike and think it's going to go, because it's not a system. You just can't take a part and put it on something else that doesn't go, you know. And even if there's chromosomal problems, etc., or errors, etc., the sex just isn't just chromosomes. It's the whole reproductive system.
Yeah.
So if you think that we have like a female with boobs and wider hips and stronger internal systems and flexible systems, etc., it's all designed around a system to produce a child after a merger of an egg and an ova, you know. So that's what it is. But they've just said, okay, it's a body with different bits. When I think about that, I think, well, intellectually, then that gives you a base for arguments of things like taking a uterus out of a woman and shoving it into a man, which is what they're doing over in Sydney Hospital. They're asking.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. So you understand, so they're treating people not like their whole systems, they're not male or female, which they have are. And they're ignoring something that's been around for 1 billion years before even humans were. Sex is older than we are.
Yeah.
You know? So instead, they've broken us down to sexual characteristics that remove sex too. So don't be fooled when it says something down here like,
I can't see you anymore, by the way.
Can you see the screen?
Nope, it's gone.
All right, we'll pause.
Now I can.
That's weird. Okay, well, I'll talk it through anyway. Down here it says, lesbian, a woman who is attracted to women. You think you're safe, don't you? You think you're safe. It doesn't mean what you think it means. It purely means that someone who has a gender of woman. And gender is, what they've got here as a definition, is one sense of whether they are man or woman, non-binary, agender, genderqueer, gender fluid, or combination of one or more of those definitions.
So they've taken that, hold on one sec. So they've taken that a step further. So at first they attacked the definitions, where they were like, a gay man is a male who is attracted to, is a male with a male gender identity who is attracted to another person who has a male gender identity, meaning it can be two trans guys that are gay together. It is no longer a natal male who is attracted to other natal males.
Yeah.
So they did that at first, and they did the same in reverse with a lesbian is a woman, is a female identified person who is attracted to another female identified person. And that now those definitions have disappeared because they've attacked the actual definition of, so they've moved another step further along the process.
Yeah, they have.
Yeah, so it's now
so a lot of people, if they're not wise, they will think, oh, we're safe because woman means adult, human, female. No,
no,
you're not. It's inherently done, and you can tell because the definition of bisexual, a person who is attracted to people of their own or other genders. You know,
that will disappear soon too, no doubt.
Yeah, heterosexual person who's only attracted to people with a different gender to their own. But that's got conflicts with other definitions that gone above. So that's one of the things that I found concerning, is the fact that that's a core concern.
Yeah.
Because it means embedded in this conversion therapy bill is an assumption of self-ID is approved.
Yeah.
That's a major concern right there.
Yeah.
And then what I found too is there was an uncritical acceptance of gender affirming care. So I went into the New South Wales Health website, and the document that they had referenced, which is the LGBQTIA plus health strategy from 2022 to 2027. I'm finding the same, that's where they got their definitions from, but also it's just chock-a-block with gender affirming care. There's just no, and there's all, and the game what I looked at when I found there's assumption that here's the thing that they sell, they market, that any type of psychological upset is purely from the fact that people aren't accepting them in their gender.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things they continually sell, is that we know that there generally is in LGB, there is a higher risk of mental health and issues and things like that. And generally it has been from bullying and all the rest of it, you know. But
I personally think, yeah, that's a factor. I think another factor of that is often overlooked is coming to terms with being different than everybody else around you is a process that takes time. Like realizing that you are gay or lesbian means that you're different from probably everybody in your immediate family, everybody in your class, all of your teachers that you're aware of. Like, and until you start finding other gay and lesbian people that you are normalized by, like you kind of, you see it reflected on TV, so it starts to be okay. Like it is a process coming out, and it does have impact on mental health, but it's generally a process that people start as they start to realize, and then they get to the end of as they kind of come out and realize that no, this is going to be okay.
yeah,
like I don't think it's just about bullying, because
no, I don't think either, because look, it took me ages because of my background. I was thinking, well, all that kind of abuse I got from men was, you know, was my response because of that. That was a long process, you know, and I just thought all that, not that they always try to say that we're not sexually broken, but it had nothing to do with sex. It just had to do with the background. How does that shape me? Particularly when you hear sometimes that there's a higher, those who, I heard somewhere that those who are homosexual have a higher, have a background that's got a higher level of sexual abuse behind it. I don't know if that's true.
Yeah.
So that's the uncritical acceptance gender affirming care. So I spent fortunately, I already had done all the work on gender affirmation because of one of our members of AWW was a psychologist, and she was brought before APRA because of a young, they, them, gender fluid psychologist who was running a seminar, asked for feedback on their 2 hours of transgenderism and how to look after transgender people. 2 years out of university, by the way. And by the way, I went to one of her seminars. This is what gender fluid non-binary looks like. It looks like a white woman with short hair from a professional class, an upper middle class background. That's what that looked like.
Yeah. So she asked for feedback and then got facts.
She asked for feedbacks. Give me the dirty and the ugly and all the rest of it. So our friend, we can't give the name.
And knowing the person in question, who was very mild and very moderate, and like kind of a bit mousy, it would have been very moderate and very fact-based.
It was just fact-based. She talked about parents, and she gave evidence from this psychologist and this experience and blah blah blah. It was all bang bang bang, and she totally nailed it, right?
Yeah.
And then this girl, I'm going to call her a girl because
that's what she is.
As I said, I'm really surprised that now I'm the age of old people.
You get to be cantankerous.
Yes, I feel like it gives me permission.
Yeah.
So this girl, which is only she's only 2 years out of bloody
so 22,
and the person she was
23, 24, something, doesn't matter.
Maybe 3 at the max, and she was criticizing someone who had about 30 years experience in this field, not just in the talking to people, which is more observing stuff, but working out in the field in a related space, and then went into psychology later on. So a well-experienced person. She just straight away reported her to APRA, which threatened our friend's license. So I had spent already a lot of work on looking at WPATH and APS and OzPath and ACON, of course, and TransHub, and I went through every single criticism they had and more, you know. So I'm so glad, because it came so much in handy.
Well, not only did it help our friend get off the hook.
Actually, it helped others too. I'm really happy about that job, because we got feedback. They took a long time to make a decision. They really went through it. But it not only helped her, but word was that it helped other people brought before APRA as well.
It sets a precedent of being able to start pushing back.
Yeah.
Because I was talking about this a little bit today. Like, I remember it must have been 2000. No, I think it was earlier. I think it was like 2004, 2005. You start here. Actually, I don't know when it was, to be honest. Like, it's a blur.
Anyway,
Be too long. You start hearing about trans kids, like kids transitioning, and you're like, at first you're like, oh, that's good on them, like whatever. And then it kind of lingers in your mind a little bit. You're like, there's something about that rubbs me the wrong way. And you kind of start thinking about it more, and you start thinking, oh, hold on a minute, that the red alert potential, like this kid better be bloody sure.
yeah.
And you kind of just automatically assume, like, some part of your brain just automatically assumes that if there are professional doctors doing this,
Yeah.
then there must be a lot of evidence. They must really be taking it slow. They must know exactly what they're doing. There must be like a really vigorous process.
No, the whole major thread throughout the whole of the research on all the different organizations is that you had trans activists embedded into the organizations. And because they had said they were the reference group and they were the people speaking for everyone who was trans, mainly transgender, that they took that as fact, but they didn't. But from a basic test point of view, from a basic research point of view, their research was crap. Across Denmark just came on board a few days ago. Finland, Sweden, UK, France, even in Australia with the Royal Australian New Zealand College of Psychiatrists have kind of rolled back already, and now they're looking at a review, and APS is looking at a review. And APS has something to blame, because that young girl put our friend before APRA, because Damien Riggs, who was a trans rights activist, not even a psychologist, a registered psychologist, not at all, he had basically given instruction through the InSync Journal for Psychology to anyone parent or psychologist need to be reported to the regulatory boards. So you had this young girl, and I don't care, I'm going to call her a young girl because I know it irritated her, that automatically was just gender affirmation with no thought afterwards. I went to a seminar myself. And I started to ask questions. Okay, well, what about the negative harm of puberty blockers? And there's just this like looking back and forward. I mean, you've got things like death. FDA had 7,900 deaths reported in June 2022. That seems like it might be a problem.
Yeah.
It's like,
did you see?
So I won't go too much into it.
Yeah.
So one thing I found that is that it's just complete, the research having done, and it does shock me. We're supposed to have people here who have supposed to be qualified, who have not done their homework at all. I mean, I had a really good conversation with Alan Davidson, because he was talking about different academics and things like that. And he said, no, unfortunately, you've got a lot of people who just have their little bubble, know their bubble very well, but never have gone out there to see the consequences of what they've done. And a lot of them just don't think. They just take it on word because someone said the standards. Like, for example, WPATH is not, there's actually no standard in gender affirming care. It's just guidelines, and it's guidelines made by a voluntary organization.
Yeah, with a vested interest in.
And a vested interest, and these guys and other researchers are researchers that have been funded by large pharmaceutical companies like that. Jack Turbin is one. Another young doctor with no bloody work, no real world experience, gets out, jumps on the idea. To me, I'm looking at this from a business point of view. Someone came along and just piggybacked and got a young guy and said, I'll give you a lot of money if you write about this, and we'll help you.
Yeah.
It was kind of like that. So the uncritical acceptance of gender affirming care, we had to knock that, and there's so much evidence against it. It's rampant, and there's brilliant resources in CGIM. There's been legal cases. There's been cases made before different courts around the world. So there was ample research on that. So that was one thing. And then the other thing that got me really irritated me is the lack of clarity on conversion practices. They make it so general.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to ask you about that because I kind of am vaguely aware of. So that they kind of are pushing everything towards gender affirming care.
Yeah.
So that is pretty much the only avenue. And I like, well, I mean, psychiatrists and therapists have kids of their own. They have mortgages. This is their career. They're risk averse people, generally speaking, to start with. Like, how exactly? Like, I kind of am aware that they're kind of trimming off words and angles so that, you know, basically the therapists aren't allowed to really ask any questions of, you know, some kid comes in and sits down and says, you know, like I'm really a trans man or I'm really a trans girl. They're not really allowed to explore too far, but exactly what is going on there, because like you hear other people from the other side saying, oh no, they're totally allowed to if they want to, blah 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 blah. Like, so it's kind of confusing what's exactly happening.
Okay, so you ask me what conversion practices are, or you ask me the process of
The process of how that they what exactly are they doing? Like,
well, that's not a topic covered by this particular paper.
yeah.
But what and the best person to talk to really would be people in the game. So Gillian, when you look at Dr. Gillian Spencer, it's in our group as well, you've actually got quite an exceptional person, because most people who are fighting this are at the end of their career or retired, you know, so they've got nothing to lose. But she's right in the middle of her career and been talking. And though it depends, I mean, we saw with you know, Ollie, for example, he's a detransitioner, that when he was trying to let me actually give you the definition first of conversion practices, because it's actually really pertinent to this discussion right now. Okay.
Yeah.
So their conversion practices, they say LGBTQ plus conversion practices is an umbrella term for practices that seek to change or suppress a person's sexual orientation or gender identity to conform with heterosexuality and identify with a gender that corresponds with their sex assigned at birth. So when you read that really carefully, because we've been doing a lot of work in in our subcommittee in defense of children on looking at all the curricula, what we've been noticing is that they've actually been against any heteronormativity altogether.
Yeah.
So you notice the focus is anyone who tries to make a gender identity conform to heterosexuality, you know. Except the problem is that when you actually gender affirm someone who's, say, gay, one, you are doing conversion practices because you're making them conform to a heterosexual norm. If you, technically speaking, I'm sorry, Kev, but you're conforming to a heterosexual norm of being masculine. I think I escaped it. You're the only person up front who said to me ever that I've got masculine traits.
Really?
Yeah. I think I scare people.
No, I kind of mean, okay, so they're like, because they're saying that they're trying to talking to someone, from my perspective, as you kind of decide that you're going to transition, like you're going to take a medical pathway, you are upending your life and changing lots of things about your life.
Yeah.
And that require that, like, it's scary and freaky, and it requires a lot of conversation.
Yeah, but let me actually
It's
answer
really helpful.
let me answer your question now, because one of the things I gave them is I actually gave them a chart of there's 4 major kind of therapeutic models, but there's 2 major core ones. One therapeutic model, if you go with the idea that there's such a thing as gender identity, then you're going to go on a pathway of gender affirmation. So one of the things about that pathway is you don't question that person isn't the gender identity that they're set. The problem with that is that we've noticed pipelining of kids to the medical clinic and social transitioning happening before they get to the gender clinic by the schools, by social media, and by continually asking them, are you really straight? Because there really has been a push, we've noticed in the curricula, queering the binary, that
Yeah,
heterosexual.
it's like you don't really want to be straight. You don't.
I really want to be straight, you know. So there's questioning everywhere. But one thing too that we notice is that because gender identity is like, it's just a concept, it's a feeling. The marker for teachers and other people is gender non-conformity. Now, when you've got a guy who's obviously going to be gay when they grow up, you can tell, you know, or a girl who's going to be playing rugby like me and things like that, automatically they're targeted as trans. So they're not called lesbian or gay. And no one's thinking that they could be lesbian gay, because the whole of the culture that's been embedded into our society is there is no lesbian or gay. We're gender identities, you know, and but those particular ones, they need to be affirmed. So before, you had gender dysphoria was a mental health condition, and the solution is, of course, psychotherapy, all the things that you do with a mental health condition, psychotherapy.
Well, I kind of think that yeah, you're right, but that was the most extreme solution, and not everybody who had
psychotherapy.
gendered psychotherapy, and then leading on to possible transition was probably
No, you
most
didn't usually go on there. Most people, mostly what happened is once puberty hit,
yeah.
Puberty was a great healer, you know, because once you
Oh,
clear puberty, you know, you like, we're talking up to 98% here.
Yeah. Right.
Puberty, you know, most 80% of them tend to be gay and or autistic, because that's kind of a black and white, very binary, or you know, kids who've been raped, abused, very anxiety. And the problem is in the schools that they're targeting the kids and selling it as a solution. So you don't want to be a lone lesbian, but hey, be a trans man. It's far more exciting. You'll be executive brave, blah, blah, blah. So that was one way. That's one model. The second model is instead, no, this person doesn't have gender dysphoria. They have the upset because people aren't accepting their gender identity. And we need to affirm them, otherwise they'll kill themselves, you know. And it's just automatic, and we don't question it. We can't question it, because that would make them more dysphoric and more upset and things like that. So you have got basically a very ideological process here, that is, gender affirmation is just affirmation. And the thing that concerns me too about that is when they've got conversion practices, they're smart to recognize, because we've told them enough times that gender affirming care is just conversion therapy by gender identity. They have made some exclusions, that no conversion therapy can be called gender affirming care cannot be called conversion practices. We can't have them up for it.
They've cut that off legislatively.
Yeah. So you can take a kid, you can, in the past, when you had conversion therapy practices, which were mainly, we call them aversion practices, you had ice baths, and you had isolation, and you had camps, usually religious camps, where you would be indoctrinated. You had electrocution. You had all these physical. You've even had lobotomies, and you had other things like being in jail and all the rest of it. All that kind of stuff, physical practices that physically harmed you. Now we've got something that you have physical practices harm you. The first thing I did is because I changed the trade names of the puberty blockers, you have to hunt them down. So I got a chart that showed how many adverse reactions there were, which is 60,940, plus how many deaths, 7,900. And then just highlighted the ones that were on TransHub, you know, and the real names, so people would know. And you look at that and you're thinking, you're giving this to children. Surely that would say and then I had a whole list of the effects. Death is one of them. But you've got all these other things, bone density issues, you've got stunting of all your body parts, not just when you know that Jazz Jennings had hardly any penis left to do an inversion. But it's not just that. You've got stunting of the brain. You're stunting the full development of the brain, and the heart and the lungs. All your major organs are stunted. It's like, for some stupid reason they thought, oh, it's only going to impact that. No, did you do your homework?
Yeah, we don't.
They did do their homework. They did 3 animal tests. They all failed. or telegraphed what would be the consequences. But TGA, the drug advisory council board, regulatory board over here, 96% funded by a pharmaceutical. They just ignored it.
Yeah,
allowed to go through. I started with just that point alone. So you have got those two things happening. You've got all that aversion practices, which were torture and harmful, and then you've got this harmful, but not only is it harmful, but they're going to be paying for it for the rest of their life. How the hell? What the hell? You know.
So, but that's not what they mean when they've got conversion. They want to ban conversion practices. They don't.
I'll tell you what they say. Okay, they say conversion practices can include conduct that ranges from secular or religious counseling, guidance workshops, spiritual deliverance practices, exorcisms, or abusive aversion therapy. Now, the first thing we know is that APRA has had no complaints of any kind of aversion practices of any kind in the last, let me have a look at my notes, it's about 6 years, another 12 years for, actually, there's another body, which is Royal ANZCP. They haven't had anything for 12 years. Aversion therapy is already banned under torture. You can't do it. It's a criminal offense. You can't do any of those things. And we know from when I did the actual submission when I was in LGBAA for Tasmania and Victoria, and even the research in there was all dodgy. There were, you really had to hunt. We really had to hunt for someone. You couldn't. So they looked for overseas for the aversion therapy because nothing had been happening for 50 fucking years. It's all
I've met two people that were lesbian, like LGB, in the 30 years that I've been on the scene or around, and both cases happened overseas. One was Singapore and one was New Zealand.
Yeah,
so they were like significantly older than me. Like, it's been a long time.
But the thing that got me, they look, so they're talking to themselves. They know what they mean by the words they mean, but there's no real examples of what they're talking about.
Yeah, but
I've been around the religious.
But hold on 1 sec. So when they say conversion therapy, like abusive
conversion
therapeutic practices, what does that mean in terms of psychotherapy for trans youth? What are doctors allowed to say? What are they not allowed to say?
Well, here's the thing. So what they were using, they're not using the word conversion therapy. They're using the word conversion practices. So they want to build the bill around conversion practices. And they've given a range, which is fairly vague: secular, religious counseling, guidance workshops. It's a bit of a worry because there are gays who will say, okay, well, look, I can't find anything in the Bible that suggests that homosexuality, like, for example, best case scenarios, you have to be married to have sex.
Yeah.
Marriage actually in God's eyes is a male and a female. I can't get married, and they'll choose to be celibate because that's their faith. Now, if they do that, whether it's consensual or not, that would be conversion practice.
So if they wanted to talk to her, I've heard of a few cases of of people that wanting to talk to counselors about not de-gaying so much, but like having the conflict between their faith and their sexuality, and their faith was always going to win out. So would a counsellor under that sort of situation be able to engage with said patient or not?
No, because because they've put in something around here further along around making people celibate. That's kind of like that's on the pathway of conversion practices. So you can't choose to be celibate. The thing that got me is that further down here, I'm not going to hunt it because we'll go too long. But the thing that got me, whether or not you consent or not,
So they're taking, so that's taking people's freedom of expression away, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, look at me. I mean, I took a very, very long time. And also I'm a bit weird. Once I make my mind up, and I have made my mind up before that I was weird and fucked up and I shouldn't get into a relationship because I couldn't work out if I was what I was. and that wasn't be a good thing. So I just put it aside and just went on my life until I had someone who I thought was an authority say, just, you're a lesbian. It took that long.
Yeah.
It really did.
Oh, am I? Okay.
Oh, thank you. And then I went back to every family member and said, you could have given me a bloody heads up, because I asked them, did you know I was a lesbian? I said, oh yeah, of course I did. Could have said something.
Yeah.
It wasn't a big thing in New Zealand, you know, you just, no one gave a shit.
Yeah, I got pegged at like 6 or 7.
Really?
Yeah, like my gay uncle would kind of pulled my dad and my stepmother aside and was like,
Yeah. Anyway, so did I answer your question? I can't remember.
yeah, well, I'm kind of a bit like they've left it.
Oh no, I don't think I did. One thing that is one thing that Gillian's very good at speaking on this, because that has been the major problem. It's just automatic gender affirming care. When in WA, the gender clinic, a lot of the doctors were contacted by Tess, and they assumed that when they had a problem person with this dysphoria, if they sent to the gender clinic, they'll do a 360 and check everything out, and only to find that no, they had a they exulted in the fact that they had 100% success, which means they converted 100% success. A one-size-fits-all solution. I mean, this is what gets me. Common sense would tell you with human beings, there should never be a one-size-fits-all. You know?
So, well, the thing that concerns me as a trans person is, like, when I went through this process, there was like 18 months of like I didn't have to do any therapy until I got to chest surgery. Like that was the point at which a doctor had to sign off before I could, do what I wanted. But there was a lot of, like, we had, every 2 weeks for the first good while. I'm fairly sure that was every 2 weeks. We had group therapy sessions where we ripped everything apart. Like there was a group of us that were all around the same age, all
how old were you then?
From the lesbian community, like shared our fears, shared our hopes, our horror stories, like everything that we wanted to talk about with regards to transition was discussed. Nothing was off the table, because this is a really big deal. Like, and it takes a lot of resilience and, like sanity to do this and come out saying the other end, and not let, like what you want to be true take over and become delusionally, influential over your life. Like you need people in your life that keep your feet on the ground, that tell you that you're being a dick when you're going too far, that like there needs to be an open dialogue between you and the people in your life. And therapy is a really necessary, tool to, get to the, you know what I mean? Like my brain's switching off a little bit, but like, so having been through a therapy, like a group therapy situation where there were no limits on what we could discuss, etc., 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 the idea that that young people that were younger than me, because I was 26 when I started transition, so people that are decades younger than I was when they start, going into a therapist's office with a therapist that is unsure of what they are or aren't allowed to say to this person, is kind of really scary, because you need some resistance to push against in order to grow. So the idea that these people are like that they're firstly not getting any pushback, that might be too scared of what they might say, they might lose their house or their license, which means their kids' school, their houses, etc., etc., etc. Like it's not a good thing.
No. Then compound that by criminal law and civil responses. Now, the hardest thing for me in doing this is like, you're basing this on something that's not factually true. It's a concept. It was invented. It was by Robert Stoller and then popularized by John Money. It was a concept. It wasn't around until they invented it. It was based on a disproven theory. His proof of concept that if you could take a child and you could train them up to be the opposite sex before 2.5 years old, profoundly fell on its face. When he had a couple of twin boys, just briefly for people who don't know, it had twin boys. One of them had a botched circumcision, and he took the opportunity to tell the parents, bring that one up as a girl. In the long term, both those kids suicided. They were sexually abused. The guy was a deviant, massive scale. So you've got something that's based on something that is most. I was interested. How many transsexuals believe transsexuals, as opposed to transgenders, straight people with blue hair? How many transsexuals actually believe that they're the sex? They're the opposite
that you
sex?
can change your biological sex.
Yeah, how many?
Only the super crazy ones. Like there are people that will look at the glass half full.
Yeah.
So they will focus more on, like, because I look and pass as a guy completely all the time. Like there are people that really focus on that. But even then, when you say to them, but you're still biologically female, they'll be like, yeah, of course. But, I'm focusing on the positives, not the negatives. So there's a bit of that, but almost no one believes that they can actually, from my generation, no one really believed that they were like, that's like the top of the declaration kind of states that there are two biological sexes, which we'll get into in a minute. But like, in order to be trans, you need to be biologically the sex that you don't appear as. Like that's what transsexual is like.
So but the major thing is they've got these criminal responses, and supposedly it's harms. I don't see any evidence. There's no aversion therapy. What are going to be the harms? What we do know is that right now in New South Wales, the police and the authorities are acting on laws that don't exist. Like, for example, you've got Curly Smith from Binary. She has been had up, paid about $16,000 so far for misgendering a man. Okay. Is that actually a law here at the moment? I don't think it is. I think what they're doing is they're acting on a law as they would have it rather than it is, an assumption that it's just being automatically brought in. There was even some conversation about taking things done in the last 12 months before the bill to be included. I have to double check that, but that was really concerning. I mean, oh heck, I just haven't put it.
We're all in lots of trouble if that's the case.
Yeah, it's a bit of a worry. And here's, so they've got criminal law responses are down to actual harm. So what's that going to be? Then they've got civil responses, which is worse, because we've seen overseas that civil responses in Norway, that woman who was facing 5 years jail for calling a man a woman, or we've still got over in UK, a lady shared the Redux article on that dickhead who keeps on attacking Glenna. And police came to the door because she tweeted that, because they can't get the Redux over in Canada. Do you mean? So you've got, for offensive stating the facts that a male is a male or a female is a female, that can be easily considered as a hate crime. I mean, it sounds extreme, except we've seen it continually elsewhere, so those are my four major concerns there, is that, and I spent a lot of time just going through the basics of life before I even answered the questions. And the most of the question was, given there is no gender identity, no. But one of the things, what's the time it's about?
We've been an hour.
No, we didn't really start at 7:30, I don't think.
Okay, cool.
We started about quarter to, I don't want to, but we decided to talk to other transsexuals. Education for me, and see what they thought. Because one thing was interesting to me, I found out, is that they had, I'm not quite sure if it was Tyrrell, what's his name? Tyrrell, there's two Tyrrell. Aaron Tyrrell and the other Aaron, I'm not sure which one.
Kimberly.
But I found out in W Path, one of those transsexuals was kicked out because he wasn't going along with gender identity. So how interesting is that? So much.
I don't think he was on the board. I think it was a conference that he was booted. Yeah, the W Path Standards Conference, I think it was.
Yeah.
That he got booted from. I think it was Aaron Kimberly. Yeah.
For not going along with the gender identity stuff. Isn't that?
It would have been asking impertinent questions,
Yeah.
impertinent questions
Yeah.
that got
It,
into.
it always interests me in the so-called bullshit about inclusivity until you disagree. And anyone who disagrees, even if you're transphobic.
Yeah, yeah.
I was like,
I'm
and then
one
you
of the
just
biggest
told me about
transphobes
another
out
case.
there.
What was the other case you told me about? Just if you.
I had a friend that was on one of the subcommittees. That was, I think it was one of the chair or the sub chair of one of the subcommittees of WPATH that joined on the advisory board of Gender Dysphoria Alliance and was removed.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what we did is we did a transsexual declaration. I'll share that. Hopefully it will appear. Hope that's big. Yeah, can you see that?
Yep.
Cool. That's finally coming underneath. So everybody seemed to like it. It's still there because it sort of popped up and went away for me anyway. So we put a transsexual declaration against gender affirmation for minors from transsexuals. And one thing we did is because it had to be legit. I relied on you because you've got all the contacts with different transsexual organizations. We're not going to name them just so they don't, because they've been threatened. But you had contact with it, so we could actually individually ask them and check. And we've got quite a lot of numbers. That's 34.
Yeah, that's
really
pretty huge.
impressive. I know we're talking transsexuals here. We're not talking about straight people with blue or green hair.
Yeah, we're talking about people that look like me.
So we started with basically what biological sex was, because it hinges on the reproduction cells, the gametes one body produces, and it makes a system, a male system for reproduction or a female system for reproduction. And all the sex characteristics are part of the requirements for that whole system, but it's a bit more than that. It's not just your XX or XY, which I find a lot of people don't actually understand that. So it's worth going back to the basics. And then I really liked the ideas about what you wrote. I just English-sized it, I'm going to call it, because I thought the concepts were perfect. You know, we're not just bodies. You know, we are a whole person, and we've got so many different layers. You know, we've got identity and religion and nationality. And I was thinking they'd probably think of that as intersectionality, but it's not. It's not just that. You know, it's the fact that some things really irritate me because they make these things like gender fluid and they're kind of there, except they're not, because they pin you down on something that is always constantly changing. Like, you're happy one day. If you're usually happy, most of the times people say you're a happy person, you know, that could be part of your identity or something like that, but you're not always happy. You're not going to be happy at a funeral. You're not going to be happy when you stub your toe, blah, 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 that kind of thing. So we put this together. I highly recommend people read it because I think it's awesome.
Yeah, you nailed it.
Yeah, we nailed it. What was the response of everybody you asked?
Everyone that I showed, which was probably in the vicinity of 50 people, like 50 trans people have seen it. Everybody loved it. Pretty much fawned over it, agreed with everything that it says. There were a couple of people that thought that it didn't go far enough.
Yeah.
But no one was like, you know, no one that I showed it to basically was anti it. Everyone was like, oh my God, this is perfect.
Yeah, I think the criticism was where I said, we are cautious about the practice of allowing children to transition, whether socially or medically. We've seen research from Europe that shows these interventions are not benign, fully reversible, or sufficiently supported by data to be considered best practice. I think they should have said, we're against the practice of allowing children to transition, whether socially or medically.
Yeah. I initially asked for the first dozen people that I showed, I asked for constructive criticism.
Yeah.
And there were a few people that were like, oh, well, I would have worded it slightly differently. One person was like, oh, I would have been more hardcore in the, you know, we're absolutely against, like, make that a definite.
Yeah.
But yeah, no one was like, you know, everyone fawned over it and was like, oh my God,
Yeah.
this
If I did
is
it again, I would have.
perfect.
But I was trying to be
Broadchurch.
well, when I did the submission, I wrote it like I normally think, which is more direct and blunt.
Hmm.
But when I look at it, it comes across really harsh. So then I just schmoozled it to be neutral, and I didn't want to. So I was just took me a day, playing with this and thinking about. But the same thing, it actually fully comes through anyway.
Yeah.
They're not equipped, they can't consent, they cannot fully comprehend. So we're really, really happy about that. And I hopefully we've got to wind up pretty soon, but I think the biggest thing about this is that to get in people's heads that it's not a homogenous group, even with the trans community. It's not. And I've got a question for you. Is there a distinct difference between transsexuals and transgender? What would you call a transgender as opposed to a transsexual?
Yeah, I was having a chat with a an older trans woman earlier. That was she nailed it basically. She was like, transsexuals are people who struggled with gender dysphoria, decided to medicalize, took a number of years to go through a number of processes, um, surgical or like whether they have lower surgery or not, like they go through medical processes that are checked and
Yeah.
supervised and blah 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 blah, and they are fully informed, like they used to be fully informed of what they were doing. They got everything in place, and then they would go off and live life kind of existing within the social contract of you are allowed to do this on the proviso that you are not here to wreck the world, that
Yeah.
you behave yourself, that you do everything within your power to fit into the social contract and like obey kind of societal niceties, etc., and be understanding. You are the one that is you are the thing that is different here. You're the one that's causing that, that is kind of breaking like some rules kind of, if yeah, sorry, that was a bad way to put it, but like you are the one that is the different thing here. You are the disruption, so it is kind of up to you to be the thing, like to be the person that negotiates the difference. Like it is kind of up to you to realize that not everybody's going to understand. That has to be okay. Like, etc., like kind of stick to the social contract, behave yourself, appreciate that not everybody's going to be on board, and that has to be okay. Um, Transgender has kind of morphed over time, and kind of looking back, I kind of came into this space as transgender had just the word transgender had come in. It
Yeah.
had won the debate, that like I missed that debate. It had won the debate. There were still transsexual people calling themselves transsexuals that were very unhappy about this new umbrella term, and they would say umbrella term and they would spit the words out of their mouths really unhappily about this new concept that had been, that had won the day. um I
Yeah.
can now, looking back, I can completely appreciate why that was the case now, because I couldn't at the time. But it's a lot more disruptive, and over time it has become, no, the world has to stop around me.
Yeah.
I am, like my feelings come first.
All right. So let me ask a few questions then. Okay. Because what I notice is one, transsexuals recognize sex.
Yeah,
Okay.
but you can't be transsexual without it.
Yeah. Two, what's the general consensus around trans women in women's spaces, trans men in male spaces if they're not wanted?
um It depends on what space. In terms of gym locker rooms and clubs and things like that, most transsexual women would be horrified getting there. Like if they're in a female locker room, then they'll be very, very discreet, etc., etc., etc. If they're asked to leave, they would leave. I know a lot of people that don't use those spaces anymore. They'll opt for a third space. Toilets is a little bit of a contentious issue because, you know, most toilets that we use aren't public toilets anyway. Um, they're private toilets or business toilets or work toilets. So there's a little bit of contention there. Trans guys generally get a pretty free pass. We don't really get dragged into that space very often, but there is kind of a it's part of the social contract. If you're going to go into those spaces, you need to absolutely be on your best behavior. You need to go in, do what you need to do and go. No causing disruption. If anyone asks you to leave, you leave. Like, sorry, I just thought something else, but it's gone. Oh, and passing is, you need to know that you pass. Like if you don't pass, then you don't go in. Like is generally from the trans women that I know that are kind of pushing back against woke ideology. And of course there are a whole heap of, there's a lot of range in that area, ranging everything up to I don't use, there are a number of
what's the ideas on sport? What's the sport?
No,
No.
no.
Okay,
They're
sport.
they recognize that they're biologically male and they know that they have a physical advantage. So they are absolutely no. They should be playing professional women's teams, etc., etc. Like no, that's not okay.
Okay. Let me go through. Let me check my lostwomensrights.com. Give me a second. I'm going to check all these ones.
I think like and trans women, like the word trans woman has kind of become a bit of an ink blot. So like for a lot of people, the concept of trans woman generally will kind of bring to mind someone that is obviously male, pink or purple haired, stands out like a sore thumb, AGP. Like those people should be in male toilets.
Yeah, they should be.
We're talking when I say trans woman, I mean Blair White, like someone that passes that you would never detect it, that isn't going to misbehave. That is kind of my version of, someone that you might be able to tell if you might, but they are pleasant looking. You can tell from their demeanor that they're not aggressive or sinister in any way.
Yeah, it's the times have changed a lot. I mean,
yeah,
back in the day, about say 10, 12 years ago, it didn't register as a danger when an occasional trans woman came in that you kind of felt, because it was just in and out, gone.
Yeah.
Nothing, there was no hatred or anything like that. So they don't
You
believe
can kind of get the vibe from the person as well. Like, but I mean, at the same time, like I kind of am moving on things as well. Like my positions now or my thoughts now the beliefs that I have now or the decisions that I'm coming to now versus what I thought 2 years ago when I first came into this debate. Like things have shifted quite a lot internally, like in my mind in that time. And I kind of think that everybody is on their own process with this. So like where I am in another 2 years with this, I have no idea. Like I may change my mind again.
I don't know. It's an interesting thing, but I'm finding that the transsexuals that I've been listening to have been supportive of women.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Women's spaces, they're not lesbians.
Yeah. The only difference would probably be the occasional public bathroom for trans women that absolutely pass, that that they know they pass. They might from time to time use a public bathroom, but that is the only difference. I'm on Twitter with them, every day, and they're like, no, you're not a lesbian, forget it, like don't be ridiculous, you're a man, you can't be a lesbian, there's no such thing as trans lesbians, there's no such thing as non-binary, you're a man or you're a girl, or like they're people that are very, very, very aware of their biology. They're very, very aware of the processes that they've gone through, how dangerous it is that kids should not really be doing, like they just shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah,
like the ideological stuff.
I was kind of joking, I think. I can't remember when because I've just been on the computer all the time. But that I've gone from LGB Alliance, which is LGB, and now we've got LGB transsexual and straight, so we're LGBTs. I don't
Yeah.
think we are though, because it hasn't been about, it actually hasn't been about sexuality at all. It's all been about the kids. At the
Yeah,
end of
I think the kids.
those people, the stakeholders and the key stakeholders on the conversation to protect kids from medicalisation and gender clinics, and that's ROGD mums. Look at the number of ROGD mums we've got. Health professionals who don't want to be sterilising kids, transsexuals, LGB. Do you know what I mean?
I
That's
kind of.
been our
Oh,
group.
this is a little bit of an aside, but I was remembering earlier. I was thinking about it earlier today, because the trans woman that I spoke to, the Aussie trans woman that I spoke to, is almost at the same level. Like she's almost kind of at the same place as Corinna Cohn, who is very based at this stage and is like, no, we are men. We should be using men's toilets. Like if someone calls me he, like that I am biologically a he, so that is perfectly fine. And Corinna kind of, I heard her in a space, so I don't want to paraphrase her, but the impression that I got off her is that the threat to women is so great. Like the impression that I got from Corinna in this space this week was that she's kind of gotten to the place where the threat against women's rights is so profound at this point that it really just doesn't matter. The trans thing, like forget about it. It needs to be pushed back. The jig is up. The game is over. And the Australian trans woman that I spoke to for the first time earlier this afternoon is probably only a step behind Corinna. Like she's like, I am a biological male. We did this. She did this in the 90s. I think it was the mid 90s. She's like, like people knew that when they were calling, like she kind of said to me, people, I knew, and the people that called me she, that started calling me she as I transitioned, they also knew that it was kind of not real. Like it was, she said that it was a bit delusional, that she was living in delusion, and that she knew that, and that the people around her knew that. I kind of see that a little bit differently, because if you physically resemble the sex that you are not, then your sex pronouns kind of it gets a bit confusing. But so I'm not quite there on that yet. But she was, like there are a lot of trans women who are kind of, well, like really, really far on the side of like this is an imminent threat to women.
It is a major hit, because it's
it is
most breaking things down to sexual characteristics makes it so much easier to package women off for surrogacy. So package women off for
dehumanizing as well.
Other, I've gone through. I'm going to stop giving my organs away now. Mind you, I don't think I have to worry because I'm too old. But if I was younger, I wouldn't. No, you don't have a right just to take my body parts and use it with something, which is just so wrong. Can you imagine a child, what the drugs that we pushed into that thing just for a vanity project? That's extreme,
Just to see if we can, basically, like.
Yeah.
The
so we had an interesting experience. I don't think it's going to happen. We had I talked to Bernard Lane about the declaration because he really liked it. And he said, actually, this should go mainstream. Because most people are of the assumption that it's a one homogenous group and they're all gender identity, blah, blah, blah. And then you've got people who've actually gone the whole hog, and they don't agree, and they're prepared to say so, And it's been pretty brave, I think. I made a PNG, a graphic. So those who did want to say that they signed could do it, because I can't share the names because they'd just be bullied the heck out of it. As long as that they're confirmed as legit, I just let the numbers know, and then blah, blah, blah. So we met up with a reporter who wasn't the usual reporter of The Australian, who handles this area. I don't think she knows anywhere near as much as the usual health reporter.
No, she was genuinely shocked to realize that there are transsexual people who are not woke and they're not okay with transing kids or giving up women's sports and spaces, etc., etc. but I don't think she really grasped like
Oh,
that.
I think
Like
I,
I was kind of saying to her that there are at least 100 just on Twitter alone,
yeah,
of trans women that I know, that I speak to on a regular basis, that spend all day and all night on Twitter screaming about how this is not okay
yeah.
and not in my name, and they just can't get any like there's
Yeah, I
no
know, and I got a feeling that she wants just some typical, um, what's the word? Sort of Felicia, kind of like some sexy story or something like that. That
malicious.
fits the same old trope,
Mm,
rather than the fact, hey, you've got a whole culture here talking gender identity. It's embedded everywhere. It's embedded in the Premier's office. It's embedded in the Office of Women. You go to New South Wales Health, it's all the way through. It's everywhere. And yet, the key people, these people that we've known for
yeah,
generations, etc., are saying no.
yeah,
Why aren't you speaking up? You know, I've got to write her some education pieces and things like that. I'm always seem to be educating journalists,
yeah.
you know. But it's like, why can't, it's interesting that the whole inclusion stuff never includes anyone that disagrees with that stance at all.
And
Whether
it
it's
I
LGB
would I
or
would argue that it's I would argue, like when you think about the numbers of people that have like transsexual people
yeah,
who started transitioning in the 50s and the 60s,
yeah,
and gender identity didn't really kick off. Like it was kind of around in the very late 90s, early 2000s, it was kind of starting to seep into bits of the like the more arty
yeah.
intellectual bits of the
I've
community.
got some books from the 90s because I was a weird
Yeah,
concept, so I've got some books to read it.
yeah,
But
yeah. But it didn't really breach the mainstream of even the LGB till like 2010-ish
yeah,
is when it
that was when they
started
were
to kick
pushing
in
it.
there.
That's actually when the
So
you find that the Soji UN Soji people tiki-toured all around the world and
mm,
started speaking. In
yeah,
fact, they had a lot of conversations with Labor, a
yeah,
lot of conversations on gender identity on Labor,
yeah.
and they didn't go
But
the whole, but they did decide to go and take out sex in the place.
yeah, that was
So those
Gillard.
conversations were had. That Julia Gillard,
Yeah,
she's completely complicit. It wasn't
yeah.
accidental.
Did you see the quote from her on Twitter today where someone asked her a direct question about what a woman is, and she basically was like, "You all just need to stop being hysterical." Was her answer, more or less.
You
But
notice
I
that
kind of
she
think,
got soul.
just to finish my point,
Yeah,
I kind of think like when you think about how long it took, so you've got 50 or 60 years of people doing this medical process and going off and living in society without causing, too much disruption in any way, like I was going to say any way, shape, or form there, but with, like kind of adhering to the social contract, the majority of people did. I would suggest that there are far more transsexual people in society across the West that more or less don't disagree, but that more or less absolutely disagree with all of this, inclusion trans stuff that happens that's going on now. I would suggest that the transsexual people that are against the woke trans stuff outnumber the woke transgendered people probably by a lot.
okay, so one thing, we're going to roll it up, but I think the next step on that area of front is to start to getting their voices out. I think I know that on the Twitter spaces, there's a couple of groups that are working on that,
Yeah,
but I do know that they seem to be a bit frightened, and with due cause, because they
yeah,
do get attacked by the TRA. What people
yeah,
don't understand is how much they get attacked by TRA. Of course, they get attacked by TERFs as well.
yeah.
You know,
So they get it probably.
they get them on both sides.
Some of the turfs can be as vicious and malicious
Tell me
as
about it.
the trials, like
Tell
so
me
they
about
get
it.
from they can't swing a cat without being abused. So
Yeah,
like I was talking to someone today that was like, because the transsexual people that I transitioned with
yeah,
kind of they're only just vaguely starting to realize that the language, the meaning of the words have changed. Like they're starting to kind of be like, hold on a minute, something weird is happening here. And then when that like previously, because it happened to me when I first started, before I bumped into Abigail Schreier, something kind of seemed weird, but you kind of
yeah,
glance at the rhetoric, and they were using all the same language as what you had been used to for the better part of a decade or more. So you were kind of like, oh, well, it kind of looks, it's progressed a little bit, but it's not too much worse than it was before. Um, and then I saw Abigail Shrier and realized that a lot of the terminology had, in fact, changed, and the words didn't mean the same thing anymore. Like lots of the trans people that I kind of transitioned with are kind of on teetering on the edge of, they are realizing that something is up, but they're not quite sure what that is yet. I was talking to the trans woman earlier today, and she was saying that she knows a few other trans women from her era that are really well aware of what's going on, and absolutely against, like spitting chips against it. But it's also not really worth, like, if they know that if they stick their head above the parapet, a lot of them are completely stealth, so no one really, like, the only people in their lives that know they're trans are the people that absolutely need to know they're trans, so they kind of blow up their lives in a way that won't be recovered. And they know that if they start getting into the debate, firstly, they're going to lose any ties to their community that they had. Like, I can never go back to trans whatever, like that's never going to happen. I'll never be welcomed. And secondly, they, like, especially the trans women, know how much the feminists absolutely detest their existence, so they know that they're going to be abused no matter which way they turn, so they're a bit like, it's not really worth my while. Like, and like, the other thing that happened today that was really interesting is the trans woman that I was talking to really like, she's like Catherine Deves and Sal Grover's #1 fan, like, is like championing their cause, loves them to bits, couldn't agree with them more. And she's kind of like, I want to stay in the background and do everything in my power to support those women and push them forward, so that, like, I'll do what I need to do to assist them, and if they want to ask me questions, I'll answer truthfully. But this is kind of a women's fight, and women need to be pushed to the foreground. And she's kind of like, there's a lot of that as well.
That's
But
really good to hear. Because
yeah,
look, one of the things I find about this fight is I'm sick of the fact that everyone is I think I did a video because I got so pissed off. It's like, we've got a raft, we've got a platform, and we all need that platform. Like, we need to get to the shore, as it were. But you've got all these people, and they're saying, oh, that person shouldn't be there. I'm going to just pull the plank off and let them drop in the water. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, the bigger cause is children.
yeah,
As adults, you've got a responsibility to society, and that is that you have to protect the next generation. And we're seeing with that gender identity ideology, I haven't seen Sound of Freedom yet, but what I have seen around when looking at the UN stuff, etc., in our research, is that it's gender identity is a big part of the trafficking. It's a big part of the surrogacy. It's a bigger part of, and it's going to be worse. And it's a vehicle of power, because it removes reality and it's putting it in the hands of it. And we know it is scary. We know that once people wake up and see, actually experience the impact of that, it's going to be too late, because they're bringing in sanctions to stop people speaking up, which has been in the Denton's handbook from the beginning. Do things by stealth, which is all this has been, always about stealth. And once you embed it into law, and once you embed sanctions into law, then you stop people speaking up. It's so fascist.
yeah.
It's the biggest evil. It's anyway, we better stop
Before you start ranting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you,
no
Ken,
worries. Thank
for your work, and thank you for getting those people on board. I think we'll leave that there, because there was many other people have said that they want other. I've been getting little messages from various transsexual who signed and said, thank you very much. I wanted to have an opportunity to say that.
Yeah.
So that's why. If you see anybody who's put the graphic up, let me know so I can retweet them, because that takes courage.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of separated into camps. Like, I'm blocked by 1,700 trans rights activists at this point on Twitter. So it doesn't really matter. Like, they have their camp and we have our camp, and we kind of are like constantly having this discussion.
How many feminists have blocked you? I bet I've got more feminists blocked you than.
I think I probably have you beat there. I don't know. It's 1,700 altogether, so probably a couple of hundred feminists, and you know, I know I'm on the permanent, you know, Nazi turf block list,
Yeah.
block list. I know I'm on that, so
Oh, well, thank you very much. We will
no
keep
worries.
chugging on. The Greenwich Bill is, I haven't read it yet. I just wanted a bit of a break.
Yeah.
Send the school stuff out instead. Yeah. Anyway, thanks for listening, everybody.
Talk to you later.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.